And one of the reasons we wanted to start our own practice is to really build a practice that's based in values that we really hold true, is the sense that when you're going into therapy, your training is important, but we think the most important thing is your connection with your therapist. That
Mhm.
you could have the most training in the world, but if you can't connect with your therapist, you're not going to trust them. You're not going to be able to open up to them. Emily and I both have had negative experiences in therapy ourselves. And so we wanted to build a practice with clinicians that are really down to earth, that people who feel like real human beings, that you're not hitting this clinical wall when you're going to therapy. So all of our clinicians also hold those values. And when we were in grad school, we were told we had to neuter ourselves as therapists. They said, don't wear anything too crazy, don't dye your hair. We very much disagreed with that.
Yeah.
We've
And also literally just couldn't follow those rules.
no,
It was more about like this was not possible to.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened was like we can't work for someone else.
yeah,
So like a big part of it, which I think is that like we took some spite from these shitty experiences with other therapists, and we're like, I can do that better.
spite is very motivating for
Spite
us.
is very motivating. And then we were in this situation, like where we were doing an internship, where we were first working, that we were like, we can't follow these rules. I can't sit here and not dye my hair and not wear what I want to wear and like not have my big gold jewelry and my top knots. Like it wasn't going to happen. So we had to create something else.
I'm so
And
shocked that that's like what they tell you though. I feel like that's like
they
you
want
said,
you
like I
to
feel like you
show
want to have a
and-
connection with your therapist, and like I don't want to connect to something so like plain that it's like there's no personality, because then I mean, obviously if you don't want to dress like that, then don't dress like that, but that's because that's you, not because that's
Mhm.
not you. So I don't know. I think that that's such a weird thing that they're saying.
absolutely.
In some ways we're a field that's very far behind, right? Like there's people that are still using that initial work of Freud. And one of the things that's happening is that psychology is currently going through a replication crisis where a lot of the studies that have come out in the 50s and 60s, they actually don't apply as much anymore. Life is simply different now. And sometimes when they're doing these trainings, the other thing is if you think about who are the top names in the therapy field, you're always thinking of older white men. This is a field that is almost like
Dominated by
by
women.
women, and yet we are not written about and we are not the head of it, even though we make up the majority of it.
Right.
And that goes to like the power and privilege within genders, that because men have seen this way, they came in. They said don't wear dresses.
Right. Well, and in the old world of psychotherapy, there was this psychoanalytic theory, right? That was, Freud really just spearheaded. And in that theory, you're supposed to be a completely blank slate, right? And so if you're a blank slate and the client's reacting to you, it's about them and you can analyze, like what's happening with them. But there's been studies that say you get the most out of therapy because of your connection with your therapist, that the therapeutic relationship is actually the most important predictor of therapeutic success. And so it doesn't really align that you can be a blank slate and build this relationship that's the most important thing in therapy without being yourself. It just doesn't really connect and didn't connect for us. And so that's why we created our business, our brand, our podcast. It was very much going up against this kind of old world way of doing therapy.
Yeah. Did you face a lot of backlash doing that, like within your peers? Like, why are you starting a podcast? Why are you doing social media for therapy? Because I feel like you're one of the only ones really that is big in like into social, and you market it really well. So I'm like curious if you face that backlash.
I wouldn't say as much from our peers as much as from the generation above us, like the mentors, right? Like we got a ton of comments from some of our mentors.
Like, you shouldn't do it that way, or you should do it this way.
You should really be careful, girls. That's what we heard all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, girls, be careful.
Girls,
be
like,
careful what you're doing.
right.
Look at it. So there was a lot of like distrust in what we were doing, which is like what anyone was doing in our generation. was a very normal thing. And now, you know, this is something that we started, right, 10 years ago. There are so many therapists that are on social media now and are doing the same thing that we're doing. And why not make this accessible? Why not teach people how to do this? One of the things that there's always been in our field is also gatekeeping of mental health, where we make people pay for it or we don't provide. Like, that is, first of all, a very masculine trait, right? Like, what we're talking about is a big thing that happened within the 90s and the early 2000s of like, work, here's how to do it like a man. As opposed to, maybe men should think a little bit more about how to do it as a woman. How do we access these feminine sides? You can also be boundaried and kind. You can also be assertive and lovely, right? Like, these things can all go together. And it is a weird thing to have people that you feel like are your mentors and you feel like are these wonderful people in the field really judge you
Right.
for your behavior. But I think that that's a generational thing.